have you ever considered, we're going to go completely off spiritual now and go hyper practical when it comes to business, the customer journey, right? The customer journey for you and your business. Have you ever actually thought through every single small step of the customer journey experience that people have with you? See, there is something absolutely phenomenal about 1% increases. I love looking at a process, maybe there's 20 steps, and looking at each individual step and working out how do I make that experience for the customer 1% better. And then how do I take this stage of and make it 1% better, 1% better, 1% better, 1% better. What happens over time is your customers are always having a better and better experience, which means they'll want to spend more, refer more, right, and become your raving fans, okay? So that is why we're going to look at this customer journey perspective. So I'm just going to pick on a random one just for fun and insert some stories. But basically, if we were to look at this, right, whole bunch of steps, and then we're going to look at them in isolation. So let's say, yes, I am using an Apple product for those of you who are, for those of you that know me, you will be floored to understand that I have just purchased Apple everything for my entire organization. Apple laptops, Apple phones, Apple desktop, Apple TV, all right? And if you don't believe me, I want to comment in the comments box. All right. So let's look at a customer journey for a mechanic, right? Let's just pick a mechanic, right? So what happens with a mechanic? You know, your car's due in at 8:30 on Tuesday morning, so let's do that journey, okay? So, step number one, okay? We'll call it C reception. All right, so your car's dropped off, you've parked in the car park, you've walked into the reception. You probably have to fill in some paperwork. All right, so that's the next step. I'm looking at the micro steps in amongst this client in this customer journey. Step number 3. Let's say give them the key. All right, we don't have to break it down into such small steps, but we're going to for this exercise. And then you leave, and then you probably receive a phone call, right? Which is the upsell phone call, which is when people say, oh, listen, we've taken the cam belt off, and while we are here, right, you know, we can also do this, which is a phenomenal thing to do, is the upsell, because if it's a legitimate thing you found, you're actually helping them out. They can say no, but anytime you've got an upsell that adds value to their life, you should be going for it every single time, right? That's business. And then you return to pick up the car, sit in wait room, okay, that'll be fun. Pay, and let's pretend that was a red box, and drive out. All right? So let's look at this process, right? Because here's the client journey that we're talking about. So if we just looked at this one step of the journey in isolation, walking into reception. So sitting in your customer's shoes for a minute, they walk into reception. How do you make that experience 1% better? Because, for example, you know, like most mechanical workshops right now are pretty much exactly the same, plus and minus a few changes. They're usually, you know, shabby. They've got, you know, Peter Brock, you know, pictures up on the wall that have been signed and faded out in the sunshine. You know, they've got, you know, whatever, some Bridgestone tire from 1963 still up on the wall, right? So, that, you know, and it used to be a beautiful bright red interior, but it's like half pink, half red, sticky tape on one side, blue tack up the wall. That's typically what's happening, right, inside mechanics. There are some variations. Shout out Ian Frost, Oztune, right? South Brisbane, who's done an amazing job of giving people experience. But how do you make that 1% better, right? You've got to look at this and go, well, from a customer experience, how do I make that better, okay? So that's the name of the journey. Then you look at the paperwork section, all right? So I wonder how many businesses are like this at 8:30 in the morning. They're frantic. They couldn't care less. They've got so much to do. They throw a bit of greasy paper down in front of a customer and they sign it and they go, right, come back at 5, and that's it. versus actually sitting down and going, okay, Mary, how do you make it 1% better? Mary, it's looking like, okay, so I just want to understand the scope. So you want us to do a 160K logbook service, have a bit of a squeak. Is there anything else about the car that you'd really, you got that noise clonking? Okay, we're going to make a note of that and call you. So actually taking 3 minutes and running through the scope of works makes them feel like you know what you're doing. You're not trying to get them out of the door. What about when we give our key to them? When, and they go, can I have your key? You give them the key. They sling it over with a whole bowl of keys and walk off. You're like, they didn't value anything about it. What if you actually said, all right, so Mary, that's your key. I'm going to make a note of it. I've put a tag on it. Mary, this is your job board for you and your car, so I'm going to put your key up here. Now I feel valued. It's 1% better. What about when I leave? What about the phone call, right? What about sitting in a weight room? How do we make that experience 1% better? I was in one yesterday. I just had some tires fitted to the truck, and it was an okay experience. It was nothing great, right? In fact, here I am telling you that it wasn't even great. So what does that tell you? It wasn't even great. But they said to me, oh, listen, are you just going to stick around? I have my laptop bag. You can go in our weight room. It's air conditioned. And I'm like, yes, which is really good. Like having an air conditioned weight room made me feel good. But I went inside. This thing had not seen, any attention since, I don't know, since God spoke to Moses, right, about Leviticus. Like this was old, right? This room was so old it had sideburns. And so I sat in this chair that I don't know what's gone on in this chair before, and there were, typical magazines, a little bit girly magazine, maybe not full girly, but maybe like Fast Fours and Rotary magazine with some girl, that forgot how to dress, the newspaper and stuff like that, and I'm like, that's not great, like, buy car magazines, but buy wheels magazines, right? Spend a little bit more. And don't just buy car magazines, because who's to say anybody in there is interested in cars? Just because they're getting a car fixed or some tires fitted doesn't mean they're interested in cars. I mean, for me, I'm not a four-wheel drive fan. I only bought a four-wheel drive so I can tow a 3-ton caravan around Australia, right? So, but you could make that so much better. They could have painted it nice. They could have, put today's newspapers in there. They could have bought, Country Living magazine, which would have been absolutely a wonderful thing to read. They could have, whatever. They could have put a, water thing in there that didn't feel like you were drinking water that'd been there forever. They're the things I mean. See what happens every single step of the way, and you just got to break down any process, right? It could be the customer trying the shoes on in the shop. It could be, the customer when you send the report back to the customer on your products and services. Whatever it is, if you were to break it down into small chunks, look at each individual one and work out how do I make this 1% better, okay? And we're always doing this, right? I mean, most of you guys have probably registered for Kingdom Business Summit, right? If not, man, you're missing out. Kingdom Business Summit, by the way, Gold Coast, Melbourne, full. Sydney, some space. Adelaide, some space. I need your help to find me people to come to Kingdom Business Summit in Sydney and in Adelaide. kingdombusiness.com.au. The team are going to put that into the comments now. Tag people that you want to come to Sydney and Adelaide Kingdom Business Summit. Adelaide's so exciting for me because it's the first year of coming to Adelaide to do an event. We've already got an amazing show up coming of people, and we're going to get even more. So I'm so excited by what all that means. Gold Coast, Melbourne, full. Sorry. But every single year that we run this, we're trying to make it better. For example, like I'm looking at somebody turns up on the morning of day one. How do we make it better? How do we love them more? How do we treat them better? How do we make it more obvious where to go to register? We're looking at the little 1%. When somebody walks in the room, how do we make that 1% better? When we go to morning tea, how do we make that 1% better? When we send out a ticket, how do we make it 1% better? When we da-da-da. So the whole way through our client journey, we're always looking at how do we make this 1% better, because that's what keeps people coming back. And it shows that you value them. Because if you always finding ways to make them feel more special, they will find ways to keep showing up, which in business usually means revenue, which means profit. So you should just work out any part of your customer journey, break it down into the really small stages in that, and then work out how to improve them by 1%. It will revolutionize your business.